Thank you. So since this is about active learning, I'm going to have you be active. I think you already have a device that's set up for the presentation. I'm going to have you go to it, and all you have to do to get there is click the click here to view presentation button, and then it will pop up for you. Okay, so my topic today, the evolution of active learning, a demand for flexible spaces, is really a story about how active learning is impacting us at the University of Idaho and where we're kind of going with that. And the first thing I want you to do is think about what comes to mind when you hear active learning. So any ideas?
Students participating, that they are discussing or moving around or responding to the topic of the day.
Okay, student participation. Anything else? Active learning. What does active learning make you think of?
Just shifting the focus on the student as the learner as opposed to a receiver.
Okay.
They kind of co-create information and knowledge.
Yes. Okay, thank you.
With hands-on, you get a different perspective than what you're really trying to learn.
Right. Yeah, definitely. Hands-on. There's a lot of hands-on in active learning. Anything else?
Field trips.
Field trips. Yeah.
Getting out
Okay.
of your usual comfort zone and experiencing something related to course topic.
Right, and we all wish we could go on more field trips probably. It's hard to do field trips unless you prepare your students like 2 weeks ahead of time, right? And tell them we're not going to be here, and I want to remind you of that 10 times before that date actually comes up. Okay, so active learning is basically just an instructional model, and it's been around for a long time, but it's changed a great deal recently because of the fact of the impact that technology is having on active learning and the possibilities of what you can do with active learning. So, I put here that it includes any instructional method that engages students in the learning process. So, things that are common to active learning are critical and creative thinking, collaboration, feedback, reflection. Those processes are all very common to this method of instruction. And there are several instructional strategies that relate to active learning, and there's so many that I can't possibly tell you all of them, because think of all the things that you do instructional strategy-wise to get your students to be active in the process and be engaged. But some ideas are think, pair, share, short writes, formative assessments. I don't know if anybody does like an exit ticket kind of thing to kind of gauge where student understanding is. Problem analysis, partner or group evaluation of individual work, and the flipped model. Does anybody know what the flipped model is? When you flip your classroom, you basically give them readings ahead of time. And so they read, and when they come in, they're getting additional information, but they've already pretty much learned the content. So it's just called flipping your classroom, and that's pretty popular in the active learning environment as well. Because if you flip it, then when they come in, they're really working collaboratively on pieces related to what they've read. So it's just kind of connected. And here's a kind of continuum of active learning practices and some more ideas that go along with it. And I'm sure you recognize several of the strategies that are on this sheet as well. So what I want you to do on the computers is click on this link. And what it does is it takes you to a Padlet page. And I'm going to have you individually just describe what an ideal space would be for participating in active learning. Okay, and when you click on that, it's going to load a page that looks like this. And if I want to post, I just double click on the page, and it pops up a little tab. And you can post your thoughts there. And as people post their thoughts, you'll see them come up because it's in real time. Oh, okay.
Oh.
So you just click the link.
Yeah.
There
Oh,
we
it
go.
comes up like that.
Yep.
Okay.
So if you click that link right there, there we go. Then it'll come up. Oh,
Oh, here we go.
So
Okay.
how do we
yeah,
get
it's
a-
just
a-
froze a little bit there.
How do we get a tablet or tablet?
Oh, you click the link on the presentation.
Okay,
So.
I'm on the
Oh,
space.
yeah, so you just double click anywhere on the screen.
Double click.
Mm-hmm.
Uh-huh.
Yep, and then it'll pop up your own little tab for you. So this is a tool I use frequently in the classroom because it is collaborative and it lets people just kind of focus for a second and think and write down their thoughts, which is definitely an active learning strategy. And it's real time. So even if I have students at a distance, I often have them use this tool. So it's just another choice for me to have them collaborate instead of having them collaborate in BB Learn discussion board, for instance. They get kind of bored with that, you know? It's the same thing every week, so they need something a little bit new. But I use it in class all the time as well. So I can kind of see some people's thoughts coming up there. Some thoughts on what an ideal space for active learning would be. So flexible spaces, movable chairs, enough room to cluster in small groups, somewhere to integrate different types of learning, visual, auditory, tactile. Doceo, thank you, whoever put that. Open, free, interesting, technology. So we've got some really great ideas coming up here. Using the outdoor environment. You know, if we could all do that more frequently, huh? That would be wonderful. Anchored landscape of inclusive relationships. And virtual space, interactive video for students in multiple locations, okay? So the thing about active learning spaces is that I think everybody could come up with what their ideal would be, right? But they all have some common needs and some common things that we see that come up within the university. Okay. And I've got to go back. There we go. Okay. So what we've seen happen on campus is that there is a demand for these flexible spaces and for technology. And where do I see this demand? Well, the registrar's office, for one thing, definitely has seen an increased demand for things that are movable, spaces that are flexible, and more technology in the classrooms, okay? And we know that, you know, if you look at all the university classrooms overall, we're talking specifically when we talk about the registrar's office, the ones that are general education classrooms that you would actually reserve through the registrar's office, okay? So I'm sure there's some unique classrooms outside of those spaces. So what do we see happening and what's the demand like? So I linked out to some survey results. The Classroom Strategic Planning Work Group, if you've never heard of it, is a group on campus that is in charge of choosing locations which get renovated, okay? And then deciding what's that renovation gonna look like. And that renovation could be anything from, oh, it just needs power, to it completely needs, you know, gutted and refinished. Okay, so what we talk about in terms of these spaces are furniture, technology, but then you get down to things like carpeting, paint, lighting, all of those things that come into play when you're talking about a space. So one of the things we found out from surveys of classrooms that we've done, because every time we remodel a classroom, we send out surveys, and we survey both the faculty and the students and kind of get their feelings about things that happened. Some of the designs that we've done within the last couple years have been taking this flexible furniture, which is in demand, and what I mean by flexible is faculty kept saying we want to be able to move tables, and they're not weigh 300 pounds, and we don't have to drag them across the floor and ruin the carpet, okay? So they wanted tables on wheels. They wanted the same thing with chairs, very easy, flexible. So even in lecture halls, in some cases, we've been able to create a flexible space. And I'll show you what some of those spaces look like. So the feedback from students and faculty has been very, very positive in terms of the impact that these spaces have had, because they said they wanted flexible spaces, they got them. Then what we do, we take this feedback that they give us, and when we're determining the next rooms and the next kinds of furniture that will go in those spaces, we focus on what they told us about previous spaces, okay? The other thing we saw was a demand for use in the Docheo Center. So when the Docheo Center came on campus, it's the first space of this sort that has this much of an interactive environment. And this would be what we would call a technology-rich active learning classroom. Okay, and when it first came online, immediately there was a demand for it from many, many different colleges, not just the College of Education. The interesting thing is that when it first came online, we were put down here, which is not our intended location, but they found out that there was asbestos in the College of Education building, and there had to be the whole remodel, so we had to find a temporary space. So this space, when we moved into it, we knew that all of this technology was going to have to be moved in 2 years. And so we kind of planned for that in mind, and therefore it has some limitations that we weren't really enjoying about the space, and we get bad feedback on those specific limitations, which I will show you here. But since people have been teaching and learning in the space, we've gotten feedback from everybody each semester, and this is just some of what was said about the space itself. Because I think integrating technology to this level in a course can be a challenge, and it's not it's not something that is natural to everyone, and it takes some work to actually make that happen. It takes work to make active learning happen in general. Especially in the beginning when you're first getting into it. But some of the things that were said, how did the technology in the Docheo Center lab enhance or inhibit your teaching experience in the course? So we had one person that said that the difficulty was in trying to marry what they could do and show the students in the room and getting the students at a distance to see the same thing. So when we set this room up, we weren't really keeping distance education in mind. And so that's something that will definitely be a part of the new Docheo Center, because that is a little bit glitchy right now. The next thing, the Docheo Center has allowed me to change the format of my course from a primarily transmission model where I lecture to mostly passive students to a constructivist model where the students are involved in collaborative activities. So pretty much the description of active learning, right? How did the technology in the Docheo Center lab enhance or inhibit your learning experience in the course? So this was from students, and they said the technology was amazing because there were so many technologies we were able to practice with that are realistic to what our teaching will be like. So these were a particular set of students that are taking a course that will be teachers in the future. Okay, and the next one says there is one annoying pillar in the middle of the room. Okay, so again, we often get feedback that are specifically related to the shortcomings of this space in particular. How did the room layout benefit or inhibit collaboration among students? And I kind of found this very interesting. One of the students said about the layout of the room. This is where I struggle with the lab. Since we are separated out looking at different TVs, I feel a lot more isolated from the rest of the room. Something you don't really think about, right? Because you think, oh, we're putting people together, so that's collaborative and they're going to feel more involved. But this student said, I feel more isolated because I'm involved with the people at my table, but I'm not involved with the other people in the room. So again, I think those are some things that we definitely took into consideration whenever we looked at the redesign of this space, which we're going to version 2 next fall. And let me switch back over here. There we go. So just some of the ideas about active learning spaces and what they might look like. So this is low-tech options for active learning. You can see the pod chairs. We have several of those on campus now in different classrooms. Chairs on casters, tables on casters. All different kinds of table shapes, but always movable. Sometimes active learning spaces, we're not talking about tables, we're talking about soft, comfy furniture and what that might look like in a classroom. And then we have all of these high-tech environments, okay? So there are so many different models out there now of the tech-enhanced active learning. And so one of them, and I kind of gave the drawing because this is the typical tech-enhanced active learning environment. There are big round tables, and there's 9 people seated at each table. And the idea is that there are 3 groups of 3 at each table. And that's how they kind of think of it when they use an active learning model. So they might do things with just the groups of 3 at the table, and then they break out and it's the whole table, and then maybe the whole table is sharing with the entire room. Okay, so it has sort of different levels of collaboration and sharing. So this is from the Teal classrooms at MIT. Tech-enabled active learning is what they call it. Montana State University calls it tech-enhanced active learning. So they just changed the enabled to enhanced. Their classrooms look very similar to the model that you just saw. This is scale-up models from North Carolina State University. And you can see, same idea in mind, still those round tables with 9 people sitting at them. They have a little pop-up in the middle of their tables to plug tech in, so it looks a little bit different. And then we have the University of Minnesota's active learning classrooms, and they just call them ALCs. This is the tile classrooms, Transform, Interact, Learn, and Engage from the University of Iowa. Collective Learning Studio at Indiana University in Bloomington. And you can see, if you look in this picture, you can kind of see that each table has its own smaller screen right attached to it. So it's very much like this lab is, actually. But then the front of the room has a giant screen that pretty much covers the majority of the wall. And so anybody can see what's going on out there, but they can have something very different going on in their individual screens. And then the real classrooms, rooms for engaged and active learning at Michigan State University. All similar, but a lot of open space because everything's pushed up against the wall. Okay, so what does it look like at the University of Idaho at this point in time? I linked out to some of the upgrades that the Classroom Strategic Planning Work Group has done in the last couple years, and you can see the before and after pictures. So if you see the before picture in the first one, pretty amazing the transfer of what it looked like before and after in that one. And you can see there that there are pod chairs that are very movable, and that was an important thing to that space. The one below it, this was actually TLC 023. And we got rid of the tables altogether and went to pod chairs that had like a tablet arm, and got very positive feedback from those because now the classroom can go into all different kinds of formations. This was one at Administration 326. And again, these are on rollers, if you can see the casters that kind of help that to be a flexible space. So that's what it looks like when it's in the regular classroom style, but they can change it to be collaborative. Same thing down here, both the chairs and the tables are on casters. This is in TLC 223. And TLC 247, same idea, but they're the tablet chairs once again, and so on. Okay, so those are some of the regular spaces that we have that are active learning. And then the high-tech version, obviously, you're in it. Okay, the Docheo Center. So when we kind of came up with what the Docheo Center was going to look like, you know, we really considered, well, what do all those other spaces look like before we created this one? This one is a lot smaller than many of the spaces that I showed you, so it's a little bit different. And I'll tell you a little bit about what the next version will be. Okay, so the new College of Education, when it opens in the fall of 2016, is actually going to have 3 active learning classrooms in it. The Docheo Center will be one of those. And so the Docheo Center will kind of continue what we do right now with promoting the integration of technology into classes, and it'll be used for several different things. It gets used by the College of Ed quite a bit, but then by many other departments as well at this point. The new version will seat 36 people instead of 30, which is what currently exists. The other thing that we found out that we didn't like right away is if we're truly doing active learning, there shouldn't be a lectern at the front of the room. Okay, because you really want to get rid of that idea of somebody just having a lecture, and you want that collaborative atmosphere to be kind of ingrained in the design of the room. So if you noticed in all the pictures that I showed you of these active learning spaces, most of them have a little pod in the center of the room where you control things. But it's very much kind of not the focus of anything. And so you're really going around and facilitating more than lecturing, I would say, is kind of the feel you get from it. So the other changes we're doing to the Docheo Center have to do with the technologies. If you looked underneath one of these tables, you would see about, 50 some cords hanging from them. So we are trying to go wireless. That will be one thing that we're definitely looking forward to. Cables get kicked all the time, and things get unplugged and not working, so it's very interesting to kind of troubleshoot those things regularly. The other changes have to do with the limitations that we had in this space itself. One of them being that we only have one camera. That's a definite limitation, especially when we want to connect to people at a distance. So the new version will have multiple cameras, probably a camera at every screen that gets a really good shot of that table itself, so that if we wanted to connect from a distance at a standalone table, we could do that, but we could also do it where all the cameras were integrated into one, and so that they could see everybody very well, whereas that's very limiting at this point in time. The other thing that's limiting in here is audio. There are ceiling speakers, but they're not great. So we will definitely have an audio upgrade, and every table will have a microphone at it so that we can pick up conversations at individual tables, again, for that whole distance learning piece, because that is something that we really need to work on. The second classroom that will be active learning in the new building is the science classroom. And the idea behind the science classroom is we're going to repurpose what the Docheo Center is at this point and equip the science classroom that way. So it's pretty much going to look like this, a little bit different layout. They don't have a pillar in the middle of the room, so it's a little bit better. And we will still be getting rid of the cabling issue in that new classroom too. And it will seat 30 just like the current Docheo Center does. And then the general classroom, which will belong to the registrar's office, will be a 45-seat classroom. It will be modeled after all of those teal classrooms with the big round tables with 9 people seated at each, and screens all around the room, one of which will belong to each table. So those are kind of the 3 that are coming online.
How will the registrar's office decide who gets to use that new 45-seat classroom?
That's a good question. So I think that I think that anybody that wants to use that classroom will have to justify what their purpose for moving to that space would be. And just in terms of how do they intend to utilize the technology in the space. And that is based on one of the things that we found out from doing research. So we actually went to Montana State University and looked at their teal classrooms before making that decision and before proposing to the provost's office that they fund that classroom. And what they told us was to be careful in how you roll it out, because you want to make sure that the people that teach in that room are actually utilizing the full the full ability of the space, I guess you could say. So one of the things that they had were people were scheduling the space because they liked the flexibility of it, but they weren't using the technology. And they could have been putting them in a different classroom. And so I think that they will take that into consideration, and that will just be part of the request for that room. Yeah. So one of the technologies we're considering in the new classrooms, and it's looking pretty good at this time, we actually had them come to campus and introduce the technology. It's called Wolf Vision. And what Wolf Vision allows you to do, if you see this little box, okay, the little box itself is probably like about a foot wide. All right. What that box will enable us to do is get rid of that entire tower. So that's where technology is going. It's making it much, much easier. Right now, what that tower enables us to do is it connects all of the different signals in this room and lets it be very interactive, in that I can, have students plug into these tables and share their screens up on that screen. And then I can cross signals and send this signal to that signal and vice versa. So it has a lot of interactivity, but right now you're plugged in to get that activity, and therefore you have to have a control that can handle that. Wolf Vision will allow that to happen without all of the cabling, because it's based on mirroring. Okay, so I can take my screen on any kind of device and mirror what's on that screen. So it works very much like Apple TV does. In fact, the Apple TV is kind of part of that whole thing, but it's not stuck to just Apple products, okay, which is very, very important. So if I have a PC, I can connect with my PC and mirror my screen that way as well. And there's several apps that go with the system and make it very powerful in terms of what it will allow students to be able to do. So they have a lecture capture built into it from the student point of view, so that if the student is in the classroom and they're kind of getting whatever is up on the screen on their personal device, they can take notes over top of it and capture that whole thing. Therefore, when they go back to their notes, they understand what their notes went with in the lecture piece, because those pictures are there as well. So it has some interesting possibilities. So that is a system that we're thinking of going towards in that new space, and we'll probably make that decision later in the year here. We have decided on the technology for every other space in the building, and we've also decided on the furniture arrangements, not the furniture itself, what the hard furniture is going to be, but just that the overall demand from the College of Education faculty is that they wanted every space in the building to be flexible. So there will be lots of movable spaces, and I think that just makes sense for the College of Education especially, because they're kind of working the way that you often see K-12 classrooms, which are very much active learning spaces. So this leads into the idea of an active learning circle, which is something that we're promoting on campus, because another story that we got from the places that we visited was, when you roll this out, make sure that you get this discussion about active learning started before these spaces exist. Because what they did is they didn't start those discussions until after the spaces existed, and then everybody was kind of scrambling to, well, I want to teach in this space, but I don't know how to do that, and I don't know where to get started, and so it was more pressure than what they intended. So we kind of took that to heart, and so we're going to start an active learning discussion circle, which will meet bi-weekly, and just discuss active learning in general to get started, strategies for changing how you teach to an active learning kind of model, getting students more involved, things like that. So I put the dates that we're doing it. And we're also going to use a book to get started, because I think anytime you start some kind of new meeting, you need something to focus on, and you need some kind of maybe reading to go with it, so that you can have a discussion topic to get the week started each time. So we're going to supply books called Active Learning 101 Strategies. And the nice thing about this book is pretty much every page is a strategy, and it's just, you know, you read through this one little page and it explains to you how to do that active learning strategy. So it'll be a nice conversation starter when we start the active learning discussion groups. The other thing that I'm going to connect to this is in the back of the room is Bradley Clark. And he is the Docheo Center research assistant. And he is actually doing his dissertation related to this subject area. And Brad, do you want to tell them a little bit about it?
So one of the issues with research with active learning spaces is that there hasn't been a lot done on including the perspectives of students. There's been a lot of research that's looked at pre-service teachers and administrators and faculty as well, and seeing what their opinions are on it and whether or not they feel the space is working for them compared to traditional spaces. But they haven't really looked at the students and what they think about it, or how the technology is working for them, or any ways that they could look at improving these spaces or informing the future design of these spaces. And so that's what I'm trying to look into in the Docheo Center, is trying to get feedback from students and observe them in the classroom and see kind of how they interact with the technologies, whether or not there's any issues that kind of arise with that, and then also how that also informs the teachers' use of the technology in the spaces, and see whether or not students and their reactions to how the technology is being used, whether it's positively or negatively, whether that actually informs how the teacher's using the technology.
So whereas my research has very much scratched the surface, if you have any questions about research in this area, Brad would definitely be the person to ask those questions, because he has dug into it much more thoroughly than any of us, and from several different viewpoints too, where we were particularly interested in, okay, well, what kinds of technologies are put in these spaces, and what do these spaces look like? He's actually getting into, well, you know, what's the big learning connection here? A lot of the spaces that were already designed from other schools too had a very specific purpose in mind when they opened, and ours will not have that, so it'll be a little bit different in that way. And I'll give you an example there. So Montana State University, when they opened their classroom, their main focus was to take all of many of the classes that were had a very high drop rate and a very high failure rate. And they said, you know, let's try something new with these classes and see if we can help these students to learn, because it was hard stuff. It was chemistry classes and some different math classes. And so they took those classes in particular and moved them into the active learning spaces when they first went online, and saw a huge impact on improvements as to the dropout rates in those classes in particular, and passing the class on the first try, for instance, was another one, and just the overall grades boosting up. So that's one example of how it was very, very focused, and I think most of the universities who have done it so far have had a specific focus in mind, so ours will be a little bit different in that way. So what questions can I answer, or attempt to answer? Because I definitely don't know everything about this, but yes.
So I'll challenge everybody.
Okay.
So this is highly technologically driven.
Yes.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Where's the analog part where students can take a white marker or a piece of paper and scratch around to develop an idea? Because we sit around in research teams. I just came from a research meeting with a research team, and we had napkins basically out sketching out ideas.
Right.
And it's like, whoa, there it is, right? And you can't do that with technology right off the bat. So where does that come in?
So
Or does it?
in the technology environment, it comes in that each of the screens is an active whiteboard. So if I wanted to jot down ideas, I can actually do it on the screen.
Can you show us?
Yeah, I can show you.
Alright.
And the other thing that it would come into play with a lot of the devices is there's several layers of annotation, so that if you have a device like an iPad, you could be annotating on that as well. So there's some different ways that is built in. But I can tell you right away that that also, when you look at some of those spaces, they have both.
Mhm. Yeah, I
And
saw
you
that.
might have noticed
I saw
that in
that,
some of the
right.
pictures.
Yeah.
So a lot of the pictures, there's space between the boards, and that space is whiteboards, just regular whiteboards to write on. So I think a lot of those environments have tested out both. Montana State actually tested out they were glass. They put glass pieces on the wall that were writable surfaces. They didn't like them very much, actually. They had some problems with them and told us not to go in that direction. But yeah, so just because there's technology in the room doesn't mean that there isn't a demand for those spaces other places. So
And what's the
Shannon's
learning-
kind of
what's-
demonstrating.
What's the learning curve on using one of these, like what she's doing, and then capturing that and making it? versus
Actually, just from experience of students using this space, it goes pretty smoothly because what we do is make sure that the boards are ready to go prior to the class beginning, and then all they have to do is pretty much just write on them. And then, there's several ways in order that they can kind of capture their notes and send them to themselves. So often, if a team is doing it, they log in to the computer at the table themselves, so that one of the team members, it's on their account, and then they can save the notes right to their account and share it with the rest of the team. So it sort of works in that way. But yeah, so there's a small learning curve, but not huge. Yeah. But that's a great question, because that's one of those things we don't want to completely take away the capacity to just be able to easily write things down, right?
Right.
We want to make
Right.
that happen.
Right.
Yeah. This space also has some limitations space-wise to make that happen really well. We did for a while in here have a little cart of whiteboards that was shoved in the corner, and nobody ever used it. So we decided to move it down the hall and get rid of it in this space. Also, I find, just as the technology integration specialist, that if I don't have those spaces available, don't have the whiteboards available, that makes people try the other thing, and they typically find that they like it. But sometimes you have to force them to try it, right? To actually get them to want to go to that next level. So, what other questions?
So are you eliminating the personality of the professor that you gain that knowledge?
Oh, I would say definitely not. So I think that, and I think active learning is so different in terms of who that professor is and what kinds of things they decide that collaborative activity sort of goes around. So I think that basically the impressions that I get from the research overall is that it's a very positive movement in terms of they almost feel like they get to know the professor a little better because of the interactions that they can have that are more not just general question based about, oh, I have a question about what you just lectured on, but now we're digging in and we're doing this collaborative project and we have some questions related to that, so the conversation gets deeper. So I would say definitely no, that if anything it would probably do the reverse of that. Yeah. Other questions?
I have a question.
Yes.
This information or this classroom that we're sitting in, I would imagine that it's also being used by business, by industry also?
Yes, definitely. So these active learning spaces are definitely used highly in industry. Any business environments where they want people to kind of put their heads together to come up with solutions. This is a great environment to do that in, where you've got the technology right there and you can pop things up and really show them very actively and have people in a close proximity at the same time. So yeah, these are very popular models in business as well. And even if you look at different models that have come out with specific businesses, like Google, for instance. I don't know if anybody's aware of how Google does things, but it's almost like a great big apartment sharing collaborative space where there's like just all kinds of different furniture options throughout this huge room, and you can kind of go to the space that you're the most comfortable in and collaborate with people. And so that flexibility is definitely being seen in many different places. In the College of Education, one of the things that the dean was talking about, putting in the outer spaces outside of the new Docheo Center, are writable spaces. That would be tables that you kind of write on the table, and you can keep writing on the surface for a really long time. And you know how all of those surfaces after time kind of get a little bit overused, and you can start to see things over things. Then you flip it over. So they've come out with some very new innovative pieces of furniture lately that have that in mind, and that whole collaborative environment, but it's not always related to technology, which I think is really important. And so that's why, 3 of these spaces in the new building will have that, but all of the other spaces they'll all have technology, but they'll have a regular technology package like what you're used to in any other classroom in the university, where you walk in and have that lectern at the front that kind of controls everything. So it'll be a little bit different. More questions?
Cassidy,
Yes.
what does the name Docheo mean? Where does that come from?
Docheo is to learn, and it's Latin. And it came from the Albertson Foundation, who were kind enough to fund the Docheo Center. So it was a $3 million grant that the dean had applied for before I got here. And but that's why I got here, is that the grant kind of demanded 2 positions. And one of them was the director of the center, who would be in charge of the research piece, and that was Royce Kimmons. And Royce Kimmons has left us and gone to BYU recently. And so I am now the interim director. The second position was the technology integration specialist, which is what I did previously, and I'm still doing some of it, but traveling around the state basically and offering technology integration assistance and professional development to K-12 schools throughout, and faculty on campus and faculty on our other campuses, and sometimes faculty on campuses that aren't related to us, like LCSC. So there's a lot of demand for that piece of professional development throughout the state. Any other questions?
So with all these wireless devices and electrons and radio frequencies flying around, does that have any effect on human beings in that environment?
That's a good question. I do not know the answer to that, quite honestly. Do you know the answer to that, Brad? I don't know the answer to that. The research behind the sort of the health issue related to that, I don't know. No. It's a little bit different than having a cell phone glued to your ear, but at the same time, right?
Come on, wireless.
Yeah. What it would enable people to do in some of those classrooms is use their own technology, which I think is that whole BYOD movement. Bring your own device. Those spaces are really meant to not only have you bring your own device, but be able to utilize it in a way where you're sharing with other people and having a little bit more impact in that. So the other thing I will do is share our staff, in case you have any needs that the Docheo Center can try to fill. We have a Docheo Center staff site on here. So if you want to get involved with the active learning discussion circle, if that's something that you're really into, you can email me, and my information is there, and we will definitely put you on the list. The first meeting is actually next week, so we're trying to get the word out as much as we can. Shannon is the lab manager. This space gets utilized for a lot of different things. So on a weekly basis, we have somebody utilizing this space for, you know, a different college outside the College of Education, and they have a, you know, purpose that this just fits their needs. So sometimes there's a special meeting and we really want it to be easy access to technology, so can we use your space? Other times it's somebody's doing a dissertation in the space. So it kind of gets used from all over the place. So if you ever have a need in that realm, Shannon is our lab manager, and so she's terrific in terms of keeping all of that under control and making sure that we don't overbook things, which I actually did today by accident. So she would be the person to get in touch with. Janice Wiesner, who's not in here right now, she actually is the technology integration coach at this point, so she's one of the people that travels around the state and does K-12 professional development. So that is her main role, is to worry about the K-12 piece of the puzzle. And then, of course, we have Brad Clark, who is the research assistant that you already heard from. And so he kind of, it's really nice to have somebody in this environment that isn't afraid to dig in and solve problems when they happen. So it's not odd to see Brad like under the tables fixing things and digging into the actual technology and how it's connected piece in this space, and helping us through a lot of those issues, and also helping us to make decisions on, you know, what the new space should look like. So Brad actually teaches a course in here as well, and his background is in art and architecture. So it's a virtual technology and design course, and they use this space to kind of critique each other's projects, and it works really, really well for them for obvious reasons, I think. But
Well, if there are no other questions, let's thank our speaker for her time and expertise. And I hope you'll come back.